Hello, and welcome to Twin Flames Between Worlds podcast. My name is Tabitha.
And I'm Liesl.
And we are going to be starting A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, our first book adventure. This will be the non-spoilery section, so we'll just be following along with the reading and following along with you. And let's just jump right into it. Chapter 1.
We are also going to be just talking about our theories as we've read the theories and predictions we have.
Yeah, so basically we'll go into like kind of first impressions, first thoughts we had, and no spoilers until the second episode about all that. So, all right, so we start out chapter 1. We don't know anything. All we get in the first, if you have the Kindle book or the book version, the like paperback version, there is a map of the world, and I love maps personally. I thought it was a really good idea. So what we see is from this picture is we see we both have our books in front of us, so to help us better like follow along with everything. So we have basically the whole of Prithian is the realm that the book is set in. So we have the wall, and then we have the fairy lands above it. So we don't get too much about that. All we get is a bunch of random names and courts and different realms that we have no idea what they mean. So all we know is that there's humans and fae in this universe.
And clearly there is if you're looking at the map, there's clearly this really random the wall.
Mm-hmm. Very much. Yeah,
that was definitely one of the first things I noticed when looking at the map, other than fairy realms and mortal lands, was specifically like the wall, and I'm like, why the fuck is there a wall? And it's just the wall.
Right, because it's, as somebody who's reading this for the first time, it's like, wait, there's a wall? Like a physical wall? Or, everything? Like, there's so many questions, which I think, again, starting this, Sarah does such a great job at having so many questions, but, like, letting you get the answers as you go along. I think she's really, really good at that. So
and there's, like, that middle section there. That also seems very vague.
Yes, like everything above the wall from the fairylands is very ominous and very, you don't know. All that like they know is that they're split up into courts.
7.
Yeah, 7 courts. And so we begin the story with Feyre in the woods. Feyre is the main character. And basically, I remember reading this the first time and being like, oh my god, is this going to be a Hunger Games spoof? Where, a girl with a bow and arrow in the woods.
Sitting in a tree.
Sitting in a tree, fending for her family, like life and death. I was skeptical at first, but I'm happy I kept reading in terms of that. So yes, we learned that there's, basically the fairies and the humans do not get along at all. Very much there was a war that sparked that, 500 years ago that made the wall go up. So it's a lot of exposition, as you would say, in these first couple of chapters. And we get our main character, of course, and she's basically focusing on surviving the week and the hour ahead for her family. Very much, how do I say it? Very medieval sounding style. Like, obviously there's no electricity. This is very much set in a fantasy realm. And so basically risking her life to go out and do these things. I actually didn't mind the first chapter. Everyone, at least everybody that I've heard, finds it so boring.
I am a fantasy geek. Like, I love fantasy stories for tech as much as, Tech is great sometimes, but like being able to delve into a book where tech doesn't exist is kind of refreshing sometimes. And so when I started reading it, I definitely had the impression of like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like a main character who has to learn to be strong. Like that's a great start.
And I think something that I found when, again, so even though this is kind of Liesl's first time reading this, I have read this now almost 7 times.
Well, technically
So
now I've read it like 5 times, but you know,
so amazing. So I'm glad. This book is definitely like a reread worthy. Um
100%. And it honestly gets better every time you read it because you notice little Easter eggs.
and honestly, so rereading this the first or like this like last time as we read it for this like podcast, I realized how much Feyre acts like the man of the household.
Oh,
I
100%.
didn't even notice that the first time I was reading it. I was like, "Oh my God."
Like the whole like going out and hunting and making sure that the house is warm, and
Mhm.
asking her family to do like chores around like either like
Mhm.
cleaning something up or helping prepare the meal or chopping firewood. And so like that definitely she takes charge in that kind of sense.
Right. And so we get that she has in this exposition bit, she has a father. We don't really get too much about her mother in the first chapter, but she's no longer around. And then we get she has two older sisters. So she's the younger sister, which anytime I reread this over and over, I'm so baffled by the fact that she's the younger sister. Um,
Yeah, and like their ages, her two older sisters are 2 years older and 3 years older.
yeah, so it's um, a little bit of a gap, but at the same time, this was, mm, I guess, I'm gonna call it medieval times because there's not really like
Yeah,
a way to describe it.
I think medieval works fairly well. I mean, uh, I guess technically there's like ranking of like people. We don't get a whole
Mm,
lot of that in this first section, but it definitely can
yeah,
tell that there's like nobles and more wealthy people, and then there's the poor, which definitely is a huge thing that comes about in medieval type stories.
which is so interesting for somebody. Not to bring my politics into the mix, but as interesting for a political major to see the political implications in a novel was so interesting to me. Um, but yeah, so basically, she has one goal, right? Feyre's goal is to marry her sisters off and stay with her father and paint. That was very much something because every time I think of it, I think of Hamilton. I think of the Schuyler sisters, and I think of Angelica. Like even though Angelica was the older sister, Angelica would do anything for her other siblings. Uh, and it reminded me of how like women were married off at the time and the older sister always had to go off and marry some rich guy. The middle child was always able to marry for love and do what she wanted, whilst the younger sister always was the one that had to stay with the family until they died. And that was their life.
And it kind of switches around in this case of like that's what the younger sister wants.
Hmm.
Although I think also I just can I just say I actually do appreciate the fact that even though she wanted to marry off her sisters, she didn't want them going into a bad household if she could help it. And so that
Right.
just shows that even if she was annoyed by her sisters, as all siblings are, she at least, she loved them and cared about them and wanted them to have as good a life as they could have, just like she wanted to have a good life.
Right. Right. Totally. Totally. Um, and so obviously she gives us backstory about her family, and then we also get a potential not really love interest, more of a so there's a boy in the village named Isaac Hale who she is rutting in the barn with. Literally verbatim what it says.
Reading
Rutting
like
in the
normal.
barn for exactly. She says for relief versus true happiness. And I don't know about you, but it's very not it's not very often where I see a female protagonist not being a virgin when the books or sorry. Did I say that wrong? Yeah. They're not a virgin when the story starts. Like in these fantasy movies, fantasy books, they always like end up, having their first time with the really elegant bachelor single dude. No, she is very much base, running with this guy for pure relief because she has nothing else.
And I think it's also good that it like mentions that it's like more like Reading and very animalistic. So it's like showing
Mhm.
that like in these hard, awful times, like these poor times, she specifically says like just for release. And I think that's an important moment because like literally it's not about like desire, it's about like Tabby said, base need. And
Mhm.
also it's not about like love, like she doesn't love him.
Yeah.
And he's bragging about like getting married and stuff and she's just like, okay, cool. Like she obviously doesn't love him. She's just doing
Mhm.
it because she needs that physical release. And
Yeah.
honestly, like I think that's something again that we don't see a whole lot because it's like, oh, like females are able to control their sexual desires much better or like they're
Mhm.
like very like controlled about that and they don't have the same needs that guys do. And it's like in this it's very much showing that yeah, she does still have needs. Like she's human and she very
Mhm.
much has these physical needs that she needs to release. Otherwise, I mean, it's like most people, like it does build up after a while and then
Mhm.
that becomes all you can focus on. And really that she can't afford to focus on that right now because she's taking
Yeah.
care of her family.
Mhm. It's a welcome sight to see in a novel that I thought or like it just again goes away from the norms. Another brilliant move by her part. I will keep saying that, by the way. I know Lisa's heard me say this a bunch of times, but now our audience is going to hear it and just me being like, oh, Sarah J Maas. Goddess, genius, love it. um but so we get all this base info about our main protagonist, and then we get to see after all this exposition, there is a doe in the clearing, and that's great. She's been looking for something to hunt, but the problem is there's also a huge. I'm going to say this again. We're going to cuss because that's going to happen. A huge ass wolf out of nowhere. And
The
she's
glowing eyes.
very glowing eyes, very huge, and she's basically uh, contemplating on whether or not it's a fairy or if it's a wolf because basically she heard legends, and this gets said a lot, I think, throughout the whole book. And that obviously it's not like a spoiler or anything, but humans don't have as much information about fairies as they did, let's say, 500 years ago. They don't
I
have
mean, 'cause it's
any knowledge.
obviously yeah, it's obviously very much of like um, you know, history is written by the victors.
Mhm.
But it's also uh the whole situation of as time passes, especially because it's been 500 years since the war, you know, stories change because they're often either not written down, they're just passed by word of mouth or like, oh yeah, I remember the story that my grandma used to tell me or something like that. And so it's passed by word of mouth, and obviously that means that stories change and details are left out. And so it's gotten to the point where there are only legends, and even the legends don't have as much detail as what's
Right.
accurate. And that's kind of the situation of the less you know, the more you fear, because
Mhm.
knowledge is quite powerful. Um, so like just that combined, like the legends of like, oh yeah, we heard that like fairies could shape shift or whatever. It's like,
Mhm.
but like that's a legend, so you don't know what to believe, and so that makes it scary. On top of the fact that it's a wolf, which a wolf is already just a normal wolf is already kind of bad, especially if you're alone in the woods, pretty far from your village. That seems quite a bit dangerous, in my opinion,
And
and Feyre is definitely risking that a little bit.
And it's because she has to, right? It's like the dead of winter. And I like how she brings up something to bring up is a little bit of knowledge they do have off of what Liesl said about legends is that ash arrows can kill them.
Mm.
There's not much of it left around the world. Feyre says about how the fairies got rid of it because it was too powerful to kill them, hurt them, anything but like to slow their magic.
And part of
Um,
me believes that, I'm just going to interject here for a minute. I think one of the thoughts that I had when I was first reading it was, actually not when I was first reading it, but like maybe the second time, I was thinking about how it's like, yeah, like fairies and fae like burned it all. But like part of me also believes that some of the humans got rid of it because
mm,
either they were too comfortable with the wall, like saying that the fae couldn't get through it because the fae put it up, or there's the whole situation of what if humans burned it or got rid of it because of control. Like the ones that have the ash wood are going to be
ah,
more like in control because, oh, everyone's going to want that ash. So therefore they're in higher demand and therefore they have more control of where it goes. And unfortunately
interesting.
humans, like either in the book or even now, humans are greedy. That's just one part of our nature. And the need for
Yeah.
control is also a thing. And so, like,
Mm,
that's a theory that I have after reading it a couple more times.
yeah, that's actually good. I didn't really think about that. Um, but yeah, so to go off of that, the opinion of fairies is not very good. Everybody's hateful toward them. Even Feyre herself is hateful toward them when so she's contemplating about whether or not she wants to shoot the doe or shoot the wolf. Because if the wolf kills the doe, then that sucks because the doe was the meal, right? So she actually ends up shooting the fairy um with the ash arrow, and it didn't kill it, so she had to go up and like brutally kill it, but it didn't fight back. Um,
It just stared at her, which, of
it
course,
just
I mean, that was the whole reason that she fired the second arrow. Like, because
hmm
it stared at her without, like, moving to attack her or anything, or going for the
hmm
doe again. And, like, she said, that it seemed anything like not human. It
right.
didn't feel human. It didn't look at her human, and so
hmm
that's what made her shoot again. And I think it's Sarah was very clever because she said that, she wrote it so that Feyre shot the wolf in the eye that was not
hmm
human, looking at her. Like she could have like
Yeah,
shot anywhere else to finish it, but she specifically shot the eye.
true, true. And remember, full on hate in her heart while she's doing it. Like she's like, "Oh, if it's a fairy, good riddance." Um, because the
Because
opinion
that's just what she's been taught.
I will say, when I read this the first time, I was like, okay, that's obviously not going to be true. Because that's totally the whole like political environment now that we're living in, of people taking one certain group and saying, okay, all these people are bad because like these few were bad. And so the political and like real life implications of that just in general is like, oh shit. That's very accurate actually.
That's like really fucked up, honestly, that like people think
hmm
that, but it's also like really clever to put that in. And like the whole idea of like not just like, oh, these few people did bad, so the whole group is bad, but like also that's just this like she grew up on those stories, so that's what she grew up hearing. And so part of it's like it's not actually her hate. It's like the hate of her ancestors that has been passed down.
Yeah.
And so she's just like, well, I've been told that they're bad, so fuck you guys.
Because all she's trying to do is be with her family. Like, she does not care about fairies as long as, like, or just anything. Doesn't care as long as they leave her alone. And the thing is, I think what's so brutal about it is when she thinks it's a wolf. So she ends up killing the doe as well, taking the doe home, but she skins the wolf and she brings the pelt because obviously that's going to be used for money. Um, and like I just thought that was very brutal for a beginning of a book. Like I loved it though. Like I don't think it was too much. I think it was like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah. Like real life. Yeah, like that's exactly probably what somebody would do if they were in that situation.
God, and
Um,
the ending of this chapter, that's where I was hooked.
yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say, go ahead and say the quote. I really love it.
God, it's such a good quote. But she's like, she was looking back at the wolf and its steaming body, and but she's like, well, I can only carry the doe or the wolf, so I'm gonna carry the doe. But then, like, she looked back at it and was just like, but this was the forest, and it was winter, and it's just like, oh my God. Because
And
that kind of
I don't
is
know if this,
like that. Sorry, you go ahead.
no, 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 no. Keep going.
I was just gonna say that, like, honestly, that is kind of. I feel like in a way that's something that I see a lot in books, but well, first of all, never quoted so greatly as that. And I
Mm,
just love how simply it was put of like, this is the forest, it's winter. If I can either choose remorse for this dead thing that I don't know if it was just wolf or fairy, or I can care for my family. And clearly I'm going to choose my family. So I can't have remorse and I can't be sad about every little thing in this forest because it's a giant forest and it's winter.
correct. Because no, I was I wouldn't say that I mean, I'm glad you were hooked. I probably was I don't think I was hooked on that until rereading it the second time and being like, "Oh my God, that's so epically done." I was,
It
I'm
is.
a very impatient person, so I was like waiting to hear the next. I'm like, "Okay, you set this up so beautifully. Like I'm wanting to see what happens next, you know?" So I'm glad you had that reaction first. I
No,
did not.
definitely. When I read that, I remember like I was reading it, and of course I read it on my phone. I have the Kindle book, and so when I was reading it, I read this was the forest, and it was winter, and like for I because of my ADHD, I had to stop for a minute and be like, hold on, let me reread that, and so then I'm like, but this was the forest, and it was winter, and I made it all dramatic, and I'm like, oh wow. And then I just set my phone down and just stared at the wall thinking about that quote for like 30 minutes. And
So
so
don't
like I think that was like the physical embodiment of being hooked of like, okay, now I can move on now that I've processed that.
I loved that. That's not something weird. Actually, I feel like this is so I've told this to Lisa like a bunch of times, but so when I reread a book I really, really like, the actor in me comes out, and so I start reading the voices.
I'm not
So
even an actor and I was doing it.
and that's great. I think that's why we're like, oh yeah, like we're both kind of weird, when we do stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so I reread them out loud, and so whenever I reread them, I just what an epic way to start the book. I mean, I don't want to like spend too much time on like just the intro,
But
but oh
honestly,
my
this
God,
first chapter is really freaking important.
all this, just honestly, all this first book is just set up.
True.
All this first book is just set up to get the world in. You know what I mean?
But it
Um,
also has a story within the setup.
yeah, yeah. It's a perfect setup book, I think.
Funny how it's not like
Um,
setup in the story, it's story in the setup.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No matter how weird that sounds, I got it.
Twin flames.
Um, so the so then we move on to, of course, the second chapter. So we go back to the hovel or the cottage. She kind of interchangeably uses it. Um, so we also found out, I almost forgot to say this in my notes. So it has been 8 years. So since they went from riches to rags, basically. So I forgot to mention that Feyre and her family were rich at some point, and 8 years ago they lost their fortune and ended up being poor. I mean, that's how did I forget that?
Well,
um,
we kind of did say it's like they've been poor for a while, but then yeah, we kind of briefly moved on from that, but it has like the whole like backstory of a little bit of how they've even though they went from
Mhm.
wealthy to poor, like how I think specifically how Feyre has tried to lighten it up. And like
Right.
it's like little details here and there in terms of the story and also literally the setup around the cottage of like just little
Right.
details that brighten it up or little comments that she makes. And it definitely, at least for me when I was reading it, it definitely felt like it was Feyre against the world a little bit. Like Feyre against the world with every once in a while her family coming into play.
It sets up her sisters well because her sisters lived in riches for a long time, and so they have this sort of privilege over her that she didn't receive. And so she's used to being the one digging in the dirt, doing the dirty work, and being out there while they're very prim and, proper. And
All about
so,
clothing
bas-
and social standing.
yeah. And, you know, my first impressions of the sisters. So we get our new characters. We get Nesta and Elaine. Nesta is the, for a quote unquote a better word, bitchy older sister.
She's the
And
eldest,
Elaine is the middle child, the middle sister.
who is
Um,
too pure for this world.
and and loving knowing that. See, again, me reading this for the first time, I loved Elaine. I really did. Um, because Elaine kind of reminded me a little bit of myself in terms of, I'm kind of sweet back when it was like 2018.
Well, I'm kind of sweet too, and I'm kind of pure, and I'm kind of innocent.
Yeah, that has changed since 2018. A
A couple years have passed, yes.
couple years have passed. I resonated a lot with Elaine when I first read it, and now I don't. I thought she was just as kind of terrible as Nesta in these first chapters, just being like, Feyre, like, when is this stuff going to be done? Like a really annoying middle child.
And like not willing to do any of the work. She's just like, well, I'm gonna follow like what my older sister is doing, but I'm also not gonna help out my younger sister.
Yeah, and
It often
Nesta and
seems like
Elaine,
they forget that she's the youngest. Like they definitely don't treat Favor as the youngest sister.
again, head of the household, making the decisions. Um, we get to see just like a little bit of how they interact, and me reading this the first time, I was like, hate Nesta, hate her as a character. Reminds me too much of my personal life and my personal relationships, uh, of with people in my own family. And so really didn't appreciate her at all. I was like, okay, you have a younger sister who's doing all this for you, carrying all this for you, and all you get to do is bitch. But we always have to have one bitchy character in here.
And I always like part of me like just like part of my being like always tries to see the good in people. But I will admit that during like this first read through of this book, I was very much like I'm trying to see good. I'm trying to like honestly, these first like section of the book was a lot of stop and start for me because I like to probably overanalyze and overthink stuff. I like to
Mm.
figure out like theories and stuff and make super in-depth predictions. So like this whole time I was like trying to like figure out what her deal was and like why she
Mm.
was being so bitchy. And so I'm like, well, like what if like she's just like super just closed off? What if she's an introvert or something? But then like every time like I thought I figured something out and was gonna maybe read some more and figure it out more, then she would say something bitchy and I'd be like, no, I don't think I can explain that right now.
It's like, no, it's very much singular path for all of them, and I think Sarah made it so simple because whenever you start out a relationship or knowing people, it seems that simple until you dig into it deeper. And I feel like that's totally intentional. Um, and yeah, before I forget, I wanted to say that a couple more things that she says as we're meeting Nesta and Elaine and the father, who, I mean, we'll talk about him in a minute, but um so we get a little bit more background on useless things to Feyre. So when she walks up to her house, there's engravings on the door. And that were from like a guy who said he was 1/16th Fey, and apparently he's basically a scam artist saying that these engravings will protect them from danger. And Feyre believes that that's total nonsense. That, I mean, all she believes in is the ash arrow thing, because she feels like she knows that works. Because, you know, why would the Fae or whoever, you know, if we're going off of your theory, why would they get rid of it if it was, you know, useless? And we also get a little tidbit that humans don't have any magic. It's very much like, I feel like I've read in some other fantasy novels where humans could potentially have magic, but here
Or like
they
maybe
don't.
they once had it or something, but
Yeah,
definitely not now, especially with all the hate in their heart. They don't deserve magic.
right. Very much hateful toward the different, and I kind of like that, like in this first series with Sarah, is very much fake people and humans. I like how it starts out so simple in terms of like it's us against them, kind of the political climate that we're in right now and just life in general. It totally reminds me of that. And so just wanted to add that little tidbit about the magic thing.
I was literally
So
about to, I was looking at my book and I was just like, oh, right, we gotta mention the little carvings. And then like
right, right,
literally you
right.
mention it and I'm like, thank goodness.
So to talk actually about, you know, to go on about after we sort of meet Elaine and Nesta, we find out that Feyre is a painter. She's an artist. Um, and that's amazing. As people who are in the artist industry, maybe not artists ourselves, but
Well,
musician, actress. Well, you have some art skills.
yes, I like
I
to
do not.
draw and paint every once in a while when I have free time or feel creative.
Yeah. So it's at least we see something of Feyre's, we see a light in her life. I feel like all this other stuff is pure base survival instincts.
It's very
Uh
dark for sure, and it definitely
where
gives like a whole like how like is she okay? How is she still like moving at this point? But then like she starts
Mhm.
talking about light and or starts talking about painting, and like you can immediately like tell like Sarah just writes it in such a great way that like literally the writing style seems more upbeat and uplifted whenever she's talking
Mhm.
about painting or art. And it's just like, yeah, that is her center. That is her,
Mhm.
the thing that keeps her going.
Yeah, because we also find out that she's painted around the house when she has Elaine bought her, when they had money, Elaine bought her some paints, so that one good thing that her sisters did for her. Bought her some paints, and she actually painted their wardrobe. And we'll talk about this more in like our spoilery section, but because there's like more nuance to that. But the the wardrobe, I just wanted to say that she specifically, Sarah describes it as Elaine is associated with flowers and all, and you know, flowers and what was it? Oh God, was it violets or lilacs?
Both, I
I forgot.
think. I think, yeah, because I think it was violets, and it's a dresser, by the way.
Oh, what did I say?
Wardrobe.
Oh well, I'm feeling fantasy realmy. Yes, it is a dresser.
A dresser with three
um,
drawers.
yes, one for each of them.
And I
So
think
there's
it's interesting. Sorry, I'm just gonna interrupt. Like, I just thought of this. I think it's interesting how, like, just the order that she put them in. Like, she put Elaine first, and then Nesta, and then her. Like, part of
um,
me feels like, well, I guess it could go many ways, but like it just seems like, Elaine is like the purest, so the lightest of them all, or something like that. And so she's at the top, and then like it feels like Nesta and her fire is like Nesta is kind of like in the middle in a way, like even though like she is being super bitchy, she is like the oldest. And so she begrudgingly does chores around the house because she understands like the need for that. Whereas Elaine is just kind of aloof and very out of it.
Yeah, and rereading this, Nesta obviously doesn't, there's this whole double standard with men and women, and when a man is very forthright and direct, it's like, oh, he's just a confident man, versus if it's a direct woman, it's, oh, she's a bitch. It's like, no, Nesta is bitchy to her sister, but in a way, I actually, when you bring up the wardrobe thing, I actually think of it in a different way. I think of it how Feyre prioritizes them. It's like they both see Elaine as a priority to protect.
Ah.
And then for Feyre, it's Nesta protecting her, and then Feyre's all the way down at the bottom, putting herself down at the bottom.
I think that's kind of what I was trying to say, and then it just didn't come out. But like, definitely the whole thought of like there is a meaning to the order that they go. Like, and also, yeah, it's super sad. Like Feyre definitely like puts herself at the bottom of like, I don't need any protection, or there's no one to protect me. Like, I feel like if she got the chance, if there was someone to protect her, like they would go underneath her. If we're going with that whole thing.
So yeah. So Elaine is associated with flowers, Nesta's associated with flames because of her personality, and Feyre, I have it highlighted in my book, and I highlight in my book. I have it highlighted as the night sky, whorls of yellow stars standing in for white around mine. I'd done it to brighten the otherwise dark room.
To think that the fire and the flowers couldn't brighten it.
Right, that the darkness somehow, made it more. So as she's monologuing again, a lot of this first section is monologuing. We find out that her father, so after they got in debt, so she goes more into about the implications of their going from, I like saying from riches to rags, because it's like the opposite of rags to riches.
Maybe that's why it doesn't quite sound right in my brain. I'm like, something sounds wrong about that sentence, but now I understand why.
And it is. It totally is. So debtors come to basically break her dad's leg from old debtors that he couldn't pay off. And so I think it was important to bring up just the dynamic of that, as Elaine and Nesta running into the other room whilst Feyre had to watch, and she pleaded with the debtors for her dad's leg, but they ended up breaking it anyway.
I think it's also, though, she didn't have to watch. She chose to stay there with her dad.
Yeah.
Like, as Nesta and Elaine. Like, technically it's written as, like, Nesta and Elaine, like, ran away and closed the door behind them. But I also feel like, I mean, first of all, I feel like that kind of cottage would not have any locks on the doors. So, first of all, closing the door and hiding behind it wouldn't do much unless, like, you barricaded the door. So, correct, yeah. I feel like Feyre could have, like, gone and joined her sisters in the bedroom. But, like, part of me feels like, one, she doesn't think that she didn't want to leave her dad, of course. She didn't want to leave her father. She also, I have a theory that she didn't want to see Elaine and Nesta being scared. Like, because she definitely has a protector feel about her, and she feels the need to protect them. I feel like that whole begging the debtors to stop, and then also not wanting to see her sisters cry.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Definitely avoiding, but at the same time, again, even though the man of the house is getting beaten up, her standing up and being like, no, please don't do this, even though, like, it didn't do anything.
How old was she? Like 8? 9, 10?
So she starts out 19 in the story, so it was 8 years ago. She was like 11.
Yeah.
11 at the time. Well, the others were like 14.
Oh, right, because it took a while for the money to run out. Like, even though they moved to the hovel when she was 8, but then they still had the money for a little bit.
Yeah, and so basically the money ran out because after they came in, she had to fix him, and so they had to get money for medicine, and so that's when the money truly ran out.
God, she was braver at 11 than I was.
It's so crazy. It's such a toxic family dynamic with uh just the circumstances, while at the same time her somehow staying strong. Like it just, I don't know, maybe if reading this at the time like just gave me so much, like, oh my God, this girl, like you said, at 12 can do this. Hell, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can go
Like
to
it,
work
it, it totally
tomorrow.
gives you not just like Sarah's writing, but like Feyre as a character. It's like, wow, if she can do that, like I can try at least, right? And then like it also definitely felt like even like the first time reading it, it definitely felt like foreshadowing of like if she was that strong then, like just imagine how strong she's gonna be as she gets older.
Right, right, right. And so just seeing like the stuff that she had to go through, and then again her she goes into a little bit more detail about her mom. So because she's like she's monologuing, she's in the room looking at the dresser, and so her sisters and her have to sleep in the same bed where they all were birthed in that bed. Their mom died in that bed, but
I
that was
mean,
the
and
only thing.
also it was the what's the word? Um, the bed was also like a wedding gift from father to mother,
Oh,
and
right, right,
so
right. Yeah.
most likely something else happened in that bed.
They were conceived in the bed. They were
Conceived, born, the mother died in the bed. They all share the bed now.
if only they had money to get rid of that freaking thing. That just reminds me of like my mattress. Obviously nothing has happened on it, but besides sleeping, so um but that's neither here nor there, but um uh it's interesting how she describes her mom, because even though it's been, you know, 8 or so years, she died before they went into poverty. Um, and so how she's describing her mom is so, I don't want to say it nonchalantly, but she describes her as such, you know, maybe because it happened so much when she was young, or I don't know, but she basically says that her mom's better off dead because she wouldn't have survived poverty. She wouldn't have
Yeah.
survived. She was such almost basically like a Nesta. Basically, Nesta is a carbon copy of her mom. Um, in terms of how she acts, and like she basically says she wouldn't have survived poverty. Um, and she also kind of gives us some exposition about how her mom wasn't really loving to her, versus the other sisters, to Nesta or Elaine. And that totally gives me other Regency vibes of the older sisters getting treated, with, I don't want to say with respect, but, you're going to get all these things, whilst, again, the younger sisters just kind of forgotten.
hmm
Because they're not going to go out in the world. They're not going to marry rich or anything.
I think it's
Um,
interesting, like, because I guess a typical cliche is that the middle child is the one that's forgotten. But I think
mhm.
because Nis and Elaine are only a year apart, and then Feyre is 2 years younger, I have this theory that because Nesta and Elaine are only 1 year apart, age-wise, and then Feyre is 2 years younger than Elaine, I feel like there's that gap that basically shows like the cliche of like, you know, middle child is typically the cliche of like doesn't get any attention, is kind of left on their own. But because of this age difference, Nesta was like the older child who was respected and taught everything because it was the firstborn. And oh my God, this is a new experience. Let's focus on this child. And then a year later, Elaine is born, but because Favor's not anywhere near it, Favor's not born yet, so that basically means, Elaine is the youngest, and so Elaine gets the privileges of being the youngest. Elaine is super spoiled, while Nesta is taught everything, and so that kind of fits in with the whole, like, Nesta has to marry for advantage, and then Elaine gets to marry for love. And then it was just simple. It was just those two. And then, it comes along Feyre 2 years later, and all of a sudden there's this third baby that needs to be cared for. And Feyre's mother is quite focused on her party life and her social life, and basically says, oh, she'll figure it out. And that's basically the whole idea behind Feyre in this first book is, oh, she'll figure it out. And she's very much left on her own, and it leads to her being very independent later on because she was left to her own devices. She didn't learn as much as her sisters in terms of academics and reading and writing, but because of that, she spent her time learning other skills, which clearly we see how that ended up later on. Like, clearly, Feyre's doing slightly better than the other two, I think, at the moment. And so that's kind of my theory about the age differences.
Yeah, and so to recap on, like, the last thing I want to say about her mother thing is that Feyre made her mom a promise. Stay together and look after them. A promise was law, a promise was currency, a promise was your bond, is the quote that I have. And so basically Feyre is living under this code law by her mother because her mother made her promise to keep the family together, which, amazing to put that on your youngest. So her mother put it upon the youngest, which I think is kind of BS, to put upon your youngest child who you weren't really, I don't want to say she wasn't caring for it, but again, wasn't like prioritizing as, you got to stick to, I'm going to be gone in a few moments from typhus. You need to keep the family together. And she is sticking by that. I like the boldness of Feyre, her morality, we're seeing her as a character sticking by her word.
Part of me also thinks that like she in a way, like maybe it may be like subconsciously, like maybe she doesn't realize it, but because Feyre, wasn't super close with her mother, it almost seems like Feyre is like, even in death, like she's still like trying to make her mom proud. And like, well, she didn't really pay too much attention to me, but she did ask me to do this one thing. So I've got to do that one thing.
Right. And so she's keeping the family together, even though she wants to, I was about to say sell her sisters off. No. I was thinking of the dowry thing, but, so we end up, after like the whole promise thing is said, because that's something that gets brought up a lot, is their dinner scene, which is, I feel like most family gatherings that I've ever been to, where it's like started out like really good, and then all of a sudden drama hits, and then everyone's like just, I don't want to say yelling at each other, but like clapping back at each other. So Nesta's talking about this guy, Thomas Mandray, who is a boy in the village who she wants to marry. And basically Feyre is acting like the man of the house again, saying things like, Thomas Mandray, why? You don't want to chop wood in the morning, but you want to marry a woodcutter, son? Like, clapping back at her kind of like that. And it's a lot of Feyre in her realistic universe versus her sisters, who are in this fantasy realm of, oh, if I do this, I will get back to this rich. Like, Feyre's like, no, we are poor. We will always be poor, even if we marry out, unless, we marry a prince. We're not gonna be rich again. And I just like,
they're very much like, oh, well, Feyre's doing all the work, which means we don't have to, which means we can focus on love.
And I love how they storm out after Feyre's like, no, you can't marry him. We don't have a dowry. Very realistic, no, we can't do this. We literally physically cannot. And she's like, she storms out like the youngest sibling. Is just like, she doesn't say this obviously because that's not Nesta's character, but gives me the vibe of, I'm going to marry him. We love each other and you can't do anything to stop us. And then
which also totally does not feel Nesta-ish.
No, like, I'm just sitting there like, you are like the super bitchy, awesome, like confident. I mean, awesome in the sense of, because she's that, how do I say, confident and direct, So yeah, definitely not in character for Nesta to be so lovey-dovey while Feyre's kind of the fantastical one. But it kind of goes into the end of the chapter a little bit because I really like, again, as Liesl said at the end of the first chapter, end of the second chapter was really good because her father finally speaks up. He hasn't talked this whole dinner, hasn't talked a lick. And he just says, he, in his really withered old voice, I'm thinking, so let her keep this hope, Feyre. Let her imagine a better life, a better world. And Feyre says, there is no such thing.
Ugh.
Which obviously leads into her, realistic, almost bordering on pessimism there. Because there's really nothing in her life that she finds. It's not that she doesn't find value, it's more of just she's literally surviving, not living, which is definitely something people in life should value. It's like surviving isn't living.
Mm-hmm. There's a difference for sure.
Yeah. So basically, second chapter in a nutshell, all about like new family dynamics and all that. So as we move on to chapter 3, so I have it as in my notes, Market Day. So her and her sisters, as the mooches they are, go to see how Feyre can sell the wolf pellet. Or
Of course they were super excited. Like, the whole, oh my god, we actually might make some money today because of Feyre's success. Let's tag along and hopefully we can mooch some off of it.
Also, instead of getting food, they're like, I'm going to spend it on new boots. And it's like, Nesta, you have new boots by the door. Shut up.
You haven't used them at all. You don't need new boots.
Also, you're not the one going out. Anyway, don't want to go down that road. Like, that's how Feyre feels in her mind when she's talking out this whole thing. So we get them walking into the market, and who do we stumble upon? We stumble upon these new characters. They don't really have names. They're called the Children of the Blessed, or Blessed.
They're blessed with ignorance.
Blessed with ignorance. They basically call them zealots, which I feel like everybody has met, those. I mean, I'm a Christian, and there's like these, you always have met these Bible thumpers who will walk the streets preaching messages and like trying to slam a Bible into your face. That's totally how I felt about this scene.
I've definitely actually had that happen to me like once or twice, and I'm not religious, I'm agnostic, but like I have nothing against people with religion, no matter what their religion or their beliefs or whatever, except for when they slam a Bible in my face, in which case I'm like, no thanks, please leave me alone, or I will take that Bible and get rid of it.
Yeah, so it's nobody wants to have something slammed in their face. So obviously, we obviously know Nesta is not particularly too happy about them. And so we get this very, I think this is like when I kind of started to like Nesta a little bit in terms of, so these children of the blessed are preaching the Fae gospel, basically. They believe that the High Fae, or like the fairies in general, are good guys, and that if you offer, this one lady goes into this, a story about how her cousin was offered to the wall, and now she has become a High Fae's bride, and all that bullshit. And
what was like the nonsense that they came up with? Like that one woman said that she was like, hang on, let's see, find it. Yeah, she's like, may the immortal light shine upon thee, sisters. And it's like, the immortal light? Uh-huh. Okay.
And I love how Nesta claps back at her about that bride comment. She's like, she probably got eaten. Which I wouldn't say isn't a wrong assumption. Like, obviously to them, all the Fae are animals. So, it's not too far-fetched to think that. We also get a little bit of information about them that, like, actually the Fae are kind of split up into two. There's the High Fae, and then there are the lower fairies. And the Children of the Blessed say the High Fae, which the High Fae are more human-like. they're not as animalistic looking. Like they kind of look like humans. They have
Looking is the key word there.
looking more like humans, but they're obviously not, they're immortal beings. Um, and there's like their own like little political system in itself, the high fae royalty, while the lower fairies are actually the lower fairies are the ones that have the cool powers and shit. Um,
They can
but
fly.
right, or like the lower fairies are the ones that look more either animalistic or they don't have like normal human looking skin. So yeah, there's like this and another political dynamic that the children of the blessed are saying, and obviously Feyre doesn't like them either. Very, as she's describing it in her head, preaching the Fey gospel is not something that pertains to her. But I mean, she's interested to listen, but also Nesta shuts it down. Everybody else is behind her, like they need to get out of town, everything. So we kind of get that little tip. We have Fey sympathizers, I guess, um, in the woods. And so as they're making their way into the actual market, Feyre stumbles upon these people who are kind of looking at her for the pelt that she has, but she ends up finding a mercenary, which I love this mercenary scene so much just because she's like that mysterious. Well, first of all, she's a woman, which, as two women ourselves, loving girl empowerment there.
A large woman specifically.
Yeah, a very large woman, both as plus size women. We're sitting here like, yeah, like representation. And so, um, the mercenary sees Feyre's belongings, so the pelts basically is what she's trying to sell, and the mercenary overpays Feyre for the pelt. And how do I say, Feyre? I like how Feyre responds like, I don't need your pity. Give me what you'd give everyone else. And I love what the mercenary says in the return. The mercenary says, somebody once did something for me, so I want to do something for someone else in need.
Pass
And
on the kindness and
I
I
like
mean,
that.
literally, I feel like the mercenary, she gave like so much more than like she needed to. She gave
Mhm.
advice and a story and
Mhm.
knowledge, which is a lot more the gold, obviously, but then also still overpaid.
Well, because I think she sees Feyre as a young woman, sees her two older sisters kind of in the background, not coming up to her and too scared to come up to the mercenary
Hmm.
and see her strength. And there, she's like, she even says, like, in the book description, she says, where did you get that? It's like, don't go out too far in the woods. You know what's in the woods. And she's like,
Especially as
no,
of recently.
yeah, so I've recently. And so I want to highlight that Feyre, in these moments, she's like, oh, you know what? There's still some good in people. It's very rare to find in this part of her village or just in this part of the world in general. And I don't think, yeah, something I didn't bring up before was that because of the whole like war bit, this whole, we were talking about Regency, right? And we were talking about lords and ladies and stuff like that. The thing is, this whole bottom area that Feyre is living in the bottom of the continent of Prythian, has no king, has no queen, no lords, ladies. Like, there's some noble people, but nobody like in a position of power.
And like noble as in like literally like just maybe by distant blood. Like literally
Yeah.
like this bottom Mortal Lands area is just
Mm-hmm.
a snippet of the Mortal Lands and it's basically feels like it's been abandoned by
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the Mortal Lands.
Because I think I've read a bunch of Regency fantasy where, obviously there's a lord or lady running a territory. I don't think I've ever seen it where it's just pure anarchy. Because even the Hunger Games, even though it was like really shitty conditions, still had a ruling class.
That's
This
true.
this is just pure, you know, nobody's in control, everybody's kind of on their own, and people can do whatever they want.
Hmm.
And that was very interesting dynamic for me to see in a book. Which anarchy in a weird way kind of works for them, but nobody gets benefits because they're all poor. Like,
True. And if you even have like one coin more than someone else, you're like, oh, I am leagues above you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like,
Really messed up.
benefits and caveats, mostly caveats, but,
Yeah.
um,
It's nice though that this mercenary is like actually treating Feyre like a hunter, a huntress, rather than
right.
just a child.
So, before like we get into the mercenary story, some more backstory that Feyre gives us about the current. I like how we're like learning tidbits as we go along, and not just full blown big. I'm thinking Star Wars exposition at the beginning of a movie. Like she gives
Mhm.
us exposition as we're going on,
It
and
leads us
so
into it slowly and eases us into it.
right. So we learned that there was a war, but so apparently there was a treaty forged by the fairies and the humans, because the fairies used to treat the humans as slaves. Um, and so there was a huge like world war basically against the fairies and humans, and they ended up in a treaty where the Fae signed that they would never be able to cross the wall. Uh, Unfortunately, as the mercenary tells us, there are fairies been spotted over the wall. Um, which I have to like remind myself that Feyre thinks, and Feyre before this thinks that there's no way that that wolf was a fairy, because the wall, they can't come over. Why would she think that that would be a fairy? You know? Um, and
But
so
just a reminder that there's always, no matter what kind of wall it is, like there's always cracks and holes in a wall. And
yeah.
there's always bits and pieces of it crumbling, especially one that's been up for 500 years.
Hmm.
But, I definitely was along the same thought of Feyre of like, it's probably not possible, right? But then you meet this mercenary and it's like, oh shit, wait, we were wrong.
Yeah, so, she's questioning a lot. There's, you know, questioning if all fairies are bad kind of thing. And obviously to her right now, yes, they are. Because of all the stories she's heard. And um how do I like it also just reminds me about how, so she brings up that there are six mortal queens living on the other side of the world, on the other side of the continent, who basically, like you said before, left them to their own devices. So they can't even call for help if these attacks are happening. There's no any, I guess by bird or by raven or by ship, but like that would take
I mean,
forever.
it would also take too long to get people moved over because, like, even though, like, on the map it showed that, this little part at the bottom of Prithian is this tiny sliver, but there's still hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of humans, and so it would take forever, and like it would take a lot of resources and ships to get all those people over. And honestly, the continent, at least it seems very much like, well, no, you're kind of on your own there. You decided to stay by the wall.
Yeah, and so like to bring up just like that there are six mortal queens that don't give a shit about this side of the world. It's like, you know what? I think I'd rather fend for myself over here than go over there, because they also have a
Yeah,
fairy problem. They have the fairy
true.
problem of there's a wall on their continent and there's fairy above them as well. It's like the same situation, just they have probably more ammunition, I would say. At least
And
that's what I was
army and
thinking.
military power, but like I guess that's something that I hadn't considered when I first read it. Like the fact that the wall literally spans across the whole world
Oh,
rather
yeah.
than just like on the land. So that means like it spans on the ocean too.
Mm-hmm. Like they can't go any, like it's, and it was sealed in a treaty sealed with magic. So obviously,
Yeah.
there's like
They
a
couldn't
binding.
go around the wall or whatever because the wall goes
Yeah.
the whole world.
And so yeah, basically the mercenary goes into the story about how there was like this, I guess it was like a politician or like some, obviously they don't have politicians, but it was some guy in power who hired her, and there was they called it a martax. So we get kind of like a monstrous creature, which was a lower fairy, that attacked her.
Was it a
Um,
Martax? Oh, it was. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, it was. There's so honestly, guys, there's so many like different versions of fairy. Sometimes we get freaking mixed up, so forgive
Yeah.
us for like getting mixed up over which ones it is. But
That's why we
yeah, it
have our
was
books with us.
right. And I have two versions
I just
because
have
I'm a
the.
weirdo.
I mean, I guess I technically do have two versions, even though they're both on the Kindle. They're, I have a day version and a night version.
Oh my goodness, no. I am an old person. I have two copies of the original. I have the original paper copy and I have the new version that they got. That probably, if you guys bought it at the time, you because I bought this back in like 2018, so they don't have this book anymore. But
Unless you find it in an antique.
yeah. So I got something special. But anyway, long story short, um, so she got attacked by the creature, and somehow she ended up and survived. But I just before like I let you speak, oh my god, the fact that she has poison in her leg. The Martax bit her, and now she has forever poison in her leg. And the thing is, the healer told her that it could stop her heart at any moment because the poison was still in it. What a badass to be able to like still be able to go through life knowing like you could just fucking heart attack any moment. I'm sitting there like, oh my god, I anxiety full blown. I just be crazy. She's just living life, man. Um,
And risking
but
her
I
life
just
because she already has poison in her leg, so.
so 100% a warning to Feyre to tell her, do not go into the woods again because there could be a possible attack. So again, that's like the main reason for talking to the mercenary, and I think she's kind of cool. Like I think it's a good setup of a character, and so I love how Nesta comes up to her after the mercenary's warning, and she's like, "You shouldn't talk to people like that." And I love how Feyre's first reaction is like, "What did she hurt you? Did something happen?" And she's like, "No, you just shouldn't talk to people like that." And I'm like, Feyre rolls her eyes and says, "Okay, whatever."
It took me a minute, like a couple rereads of it, of the scene, to realize that, first of all, Nesta and Elaine, or specifically Nesta pulling Feyre away, like, wow, for once Nesta's actually being super protective of Feyre. So first of
Right.
all, wow. And then second of all, it took me a couple of rereads to realize that, when they were talking about, like, Feyre's like, oh, well, did she hurt you? And they were like, no, not that one. I didn't realize that they were talking that another mercenary had mugged them.
Yeah.
And so they're, again, grouping a group of people
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, all mercenaries are bad.
Mm-hmm. A lot of motifs in that. Just saying.
Yep.
Um, and then we like again, I think I like even though we're getting this kind of toxic dynamic from her sisters, like we still get some, I don't want to say sisterly bonding in terms of her like uh, the whole mercenary thing is done and they're walking back and they're just like, see who's over there, and like Nesta's like making fun of her, and so we see Isaac from across the way um kind of like giving them a signal. I'm just like, every time I hear that, just like, Isaac gave me a signal to go to our secret spot in the barn. I'm thinking like there's some secret hand signal that they're
No, it's
doing. Like,
totally
we're,
like he's just like standing there leaning against the building and just like,
oh my god, like such a douchebag. Yeah, no, I can see that. Like a Gaston type, like,
it's like, come on, over here, sweetheart.
not at all as like brawn as Gaston. I'm picturing him like short, stocky, like white twig. White
Yeah.
twig, but which there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a white twig boy, but also at the same time, that's what I'm picturing.
Like a white LeFou.
Um, oh my god,
Or
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
a
And
skinny
so,
LeFou.
right. Because they're starving. Um, and so I don't want to. I guess like my thing about Isaac is just I what a man, because apparently he's the one, because obviously they do not want to have a child. especially in this time, and because they don't love each other. Um, so Isaac buys the contraceptive brew for her, and so he takes it. Well, not buys it for him. He buys it for himself for her because she said I wouldn't have touched him otherwise.
Yeah, and just like clearing up, like, it took again a couple rereads for this part, but like the whole like reminding myself that this is kind of medieval times, and so they don't have like birth control or anything like that. They just have a contraceptive brew that can be taken
Oh, yeah.
by either male or female.
Mhm.
And because Favorite can't afford it, he's literally being the man and taking it himself, affording it and buying it for himself to take it,
Right.
because they don't want to risk putting a child into this world.
Exactly. Right. So it's, I don't know. I like him as it's like a good intro character. I also was thinking to myself at the same time, I'm like, yeah, that's not going to be the person she ends up with. Like that, like there doesn't seem to be any love. There doesn't seem to be any romance sparking in them. Really, just seems to be for for convenience.
It definitely, I mean, kind of like moving on a little bit to end of this chapter of like, she's just chilling in front of the fire at stuff. And so it's like
Mhm.
a time skip basically. So it shows that this sex is not as important. It's not a super important
Oh,
moment of her life because it doesn't have like a sex scene or whatever. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go fuck this guy in the barn. And then like it
yeah,
just time skips later.
yeah, true. So 100% accurate. And I will say, as some people have told me, and specifically my manager, I don't want to, so I can't bring up her name just because, anonymous sake. But so she has like a 3 chapter rule that if by the end of the 3rd chapter she's not interested, she'll put the book down, which the reason I bring her up is because that's not the first time that I've heard that. There's like people who have like a 4 chapter rule, whatever. So I'm thinking to myself, as she's reading this, end of chapter 3 is just full blown, like you said, there's calmness and then full blown chaos. We have the basically the room blow open. The door blows out and there is a beast in the house. Like a huge ass beast.
Enormous, growling shape appeared in the doorway with a giant roar that half deafened me.
I love how you read that. I love how you read that.
And my sister screamed as snow burst into the room.
Now we're going British with it. um
Thanks,
yeah,
I've been
so
practicing my accent.
you're welcome. Um and so yeah, so we get this huge beast. Definitely not any beast that's mortal or any sort of normal beast. So obviously a fairy. And so we get her father, Nesta and Elaine, like crumpled in the corner, Nesta protecting Elaine, like it seems like she always does, and Feyre, badass, standing up to the fairy almost like she has a freaking death wish.
I will say I like the way that they describe this creature because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, first of all, she's like not a Martax, thank goodness, because like literally she was just scared by one earlier that day. But
Right.
like, I'm just gonna read it because I have this highlighted of
Mm-hmm.
like, as large as a horse, and while his body was somewhat feline, his head was distinctly wolfish, which is very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there's elk-like horns protruding from his head. Like, what
Right.
kind of weird mashup Frankenstein creature is this? And
It's true.
and then she's like, well, lion or hound or elk. This thing is like huge and dangerous at least.
Right, right, right.
But it's
And
still just like me and Favor being very confused as to what kind of creature this is.
I think she's this whole time she's running on pure adrenaline. Like
Oh
the
yeah,
fact that she's
100%.
so I don't want to say she's calm. It's just like she has been the protector at this point, and so her family's in danger. Full on feral mode. This threat has come in. She's obviously taking the high ground on this one. Even though I would be like shitting my pants. Like I don't think I would be Elaine sake, I feel like I'd be standing behind Feyre, but I wouldn't be like up in its face. Um, and so of course the fairy's screaming like murderers, murderers, and they're like she's surprisingly calm in answering. Um,
One thought of just like the one thought echoing in her head is just fairy. It's like, no duh.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, this kind of was gonna happen, wasn't it?
Probably.
Um, so of course, like her father and Nesta are like, please, we didn't kill anyone, we didn't kill anyone, and Feyre immediately snatches up a knife, like, get out, be gone, like,
I
like somehow
totally
that's
imagine her like holding like a butter knife though. Like a not just a butter
Mhm.
knife, but because they mentioned they had cheap assortment of like silverware. So I imagine like
Right.
those kid butter knives that have like the really cheesy, colorful handles and like tiny, like super soft, just going back.
Like, be gone, like such a badass holding something so stupid. Yeah, yeah,
That's totally what I imagine.
yeah. And so obviously scaring the crap out of everybody.
Of
Um,
course.
so yeah, she brings up so many times like the fairy could have killed me, but it was like a warning. So he like lunges for her to get back, and he just yells, "Who killed him? Killed who?" And so obviously the wheels are turning for Feyre, like, oh shit.
Playing the him game.
It's playing the pronoun game. Who do you mean, the wolf? Oh yeah, I skinned him.
And then sold his fur.
She just, I mean, honestly, at this point, there's really no way to lie. Like, honestly, what else was she gonna say? Like, if she lied, he would have knew.
She's like, well, I skinned him for money, so do you want like the money back or something?
Oh my god. Or like, I love how she at first says, what if it was mistakenly killed?
She's like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Well, Mr. Angry Beast, sir, what if it was mistakenly killed? Like, what if it was an accident?
Right, right, right. I think again, Sarah, goddess queen, I think she's so good at making like a really scary scene somehow be a little bit comedic.
It's so comedic.
Because, this is like serious stuff like that is happening, and she's kind of like, well, okay, let's bargain. You are not in a position to bargain. He could literally kill you at any time, but you're sitting here like, wow, the audacity.
The audacity.
So, but she stands up to him like, I did it. I did it. I killed him. I skinned his market, or I skinned his market. I,
Freudian slip.
well, I've told Liesl a bunch of times. I have I mean, obviously I do not have diagnosed dyslexia like when reading, but I feel like I just have a verbal dyslexia where I'll say things backwards, even though like I know what I meant. But anyway, apologies if that comes out a couple
But did
times.
you meant what you know? I mean, did you mean what? Never
Do
mind, I'm
not
now just
Yoda
confusing
me.
myself.
Do not Yoda me. I already do that as much as it is.
I Yoda myself, so I'm Yodel.
But,
Yodel. Yod. I'm just gonna stop talking. Continue.
yeah, just um. Anyway, yeah, selling the hide at the market. It's like if I'd known it was a fairy, I wouldn't have touched it. And he's like, liar, because obviously something that isn't really a spoiler, but I feel like I can say is that something that the Fae can do is they can smell. I mean, obviously they have such a heightened sense of smell because they're immortal beings, kind of like a werewolf would be. And so they can sense lying, which obviously he would know if she was lying about it. Because lying does have a smell.
Lying seems to be a like recurring theme, but like
Oh,
the whole like idea of like in terms of like the history of like well fairies and fae can't lie, like it's impossible for them to lie,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah. There's like also a bunch of motifs about, truth versus, you know, or I would even say truth versus like exaggeration. of something, because we were talking about earlier, right, about how things were passed on to generations, like that stuff gets muddled. You never know what's really true versus how it was 500 years ago
Right. Again,
versus the.
yeah, like everything gets muddled, nothing gets passed on right.
So we don't know if actually what everybody was saying, like passed on from generation to generation, was actually true. So that just makes everything have so much anxiety, you know what I mean? So yeah, basically the the beast, I would say. Um I, I like how um actually I like this quote before we go on. She says, Feyre says in her mind, better to die with my chin held high than groveling like a cowering worm. Very pro and very badass of her to say that, because I mean, honestly, it's true at that point. Um so basically the beast says, um, you know, uh, you didn't slaughter him, or sorry, you didn't slaughter him for a reason. He wasn't attacking you because apparently it was a he. Um, like you weren't provoked. You must give your life up in exchange per the treaty's requirements. Apparently, the treaty had a requirement that if a human killed a fairy, um, that they would have to give up for the life in exchange. Which she's like, didn't know that was a part of the treaty at all.
Yeah, because she's now feeling like she didn't learn about the treaty enough.
Right, because apparently there were so many nuances to it that they didn't know
But
about.
then
But
it makes me think of like if she knew that this was part of a treaty, like if she's probably thinking like if she had learned that, if unprovoked and killed or whatever, then it's a life for a life. If she had learned that, then like would she have still killed something that she was unsure if it was fairy?
I feel like she still would have.
Honestly, yeah. Maybe like she would have been like, "Oh, it was a wolf. I killed it
Yeah,
because it
because
was a wolf and it was eating my dinner."
right, she could have given some excuse to say it, but so I think she still would have done it.
Yeah, true.
Um, but so basically, Feyre says, I mean, she concedes to it rather quickly. She's like, just do it outside. Don't make my family watch. I don't want them to see another tragedy. Which,
Not where they have to wash away my blood and gore.
yeah. And so I obviously, again, rereading this, but thinking in the moments, like, the beast says, willing to accept your fate so easily, for having the nerve to request where I slaughter you, I'll let you in on a secret. Prithian must claim your life in some way for the life you took from it. So as a representative of the immortal realm, I can either gut you like swine, or you can cross the wall and live out the remainder of your days in Prithian. So the beast gives her an out in this
Yeah.
whole situation. At first, I'm thinking to myself, why in the hell would he even give her a chance? Like, it
'Cause
seems like he's so.
apparently, like, she killed his friend, so why the hell is he... Like, he didn't have to give her an out.
And I really, when I read it the first time, I really thought because he saw, kind of like the mercenary, kind of saw her, he saw her circumstance and saw how she was protecting her family and maybe admired her bravery. Um, I definitely think that was my first reaction, and that's why he maybe gave her the out. Um, but obviously, still a little confusing though, because
I
from
will say, I think one of my first thoughts, one of my earlier thoughts about this scene and why he gave the out was, because, sometimes people get really petty when they want revenge, and maybe that he had thought it out more, and so instead of like killing her right away, he wanted to like prolong the death or whatever by, dare I say, like leaving her to the elements of Prithian, a human to the creatures that live in Prithian. So that was
yeah,
a thought that crossed my mind of like, he's just gonna let something else kill her and let her be terrified rather than do it here or whatever. But, that was just one of the brief ones that I just felt like sharing.
I guess like for me, I guess I saw it like the opposite way. I thought he was giving her mercy because I think it was a way of, because I mean, I felt like I knew right from the get-go that, generalizing a population of people, whether or not they be like immortal beings or whatever, or even just people in real life, there's obviously going to be good people out there. And so I definitely was thinking this was a merciful move and not some petty revenge. It's interesting to see the different opinion
Yeah.
about
I
seeing
mean,
it.
that definitely was only there for like a minute. Like, it wasn't like one that I entertained a lot. I definitely switched on to the Mercy track pretty quickly. But I was also, and also like, oh, I'm sure I'll figure out more about it later. But that was just for the sake of offering up different thoughts and theories.
Right, right. And and I didn't really say this like in the beginning or when we did our trailer because I kind of forget halfway into this that this was supposed to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And then I remember this moment and I'm like, yeah, that checks out. So Sarah originally wrote this as she was doing this as a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And to me, there's like elements where I feel like it is. And obviously this is one of them. But even in that, the Beast didn't steal her away. Like, it wasn't like a thing like that. It was Belle ended up going to the castle and taking her place in front of, like, she voluntarily took her place or took her father's place. Like, definitely a different setup, though.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, just talking about Sarah's Beauty and the Beast retelling.
She like took it and then amplified it tenfold.
Right, right. Definitely not. Probably a little bit more gore, a little bit more horror in it.
Yeah.
So basically, he's also allowing her to live on his land, which way, like, he even says it, and she's like, she keeps questioning, like, why? And he's like, you murdered my friend, murdered him, skinned him, and yet you had the nerve to question my generosity?
It's like, well, why are you giving that generosity if she did all these bad things?
I'm just curious, dude. Like,
I mean, shouldn't it like show that she's actually fairly smart? You know, that she's questioning this instead of just immediately being like, "Oh, almighty immortal God, like, thank you for accepting me and choosing me."
right. I feel like that would work on a Children of the Blessed, but not this situation at all.
No.
So I think also something important to bring up, like this whole time that she's, having this conversation with the creature instead of, because I could go all day talking about like the nuances of their conversation, but basically she's, questioning or not whether she wants to leave because the thing is that was her mother's one thing.
And stay
with the
together.
family, stay together, stay with the family. That was literally her one thing. And I feel like Feyre, because that was her one thing her whole life, is just sitting here like, well, if I do that, though, I mean, one, I die, and then I'm breaking the promise anyway. Two, I go off to live in Prythian, never to see them again. Even though they're kind of a toxic family group, like, she still cares about them.
Or 2.5. Like, she could go off to Prythian and then find her way home.
Yeah, and, figure it out, which is, like, I feel like that she's practically thinking, like, when she's trying to gonna escape the situation, but right now she's kind of forced to take the road. But I think what confused me the most when I read this the first time was that, obviously the Beast tells her to go right now, but her dad, says, go. Very adamantly. He's just like, you were always too good for here, Feyre, too good for us, too good for everyone. You come somewhere new and you make a name for yourself.
Can I just say, though, real quick, sorry to interrupt, at first, he says, do it, Feyre, go. But then, like, a moment later, he says, please, good Sir Feyre is my youngest, I beseech you to spare her. And then tells her to go again. It's like, sir, you're very confused in your mumblings.
And I think, especially reading this the first time, I felt kind of sad for her. Like, I was like, this is a sad thing for somebody who you've been caring for the last 8 or so years is telling you to, yeah, you don't need to come back. Like,
We
we
don't
don't
need you
need you.
here. It's fine.
It's like you have needed nothing but her. Like, she has been your sustenance, she has been your rock, she has been your force, your source of income, food. To tell her to just leave is, I feel like, is definitely like a dick move.
Yeah.
Like again, reading it maybe a second time, I thought of it more as, like I feel like I can see his, like I can see the bigger picture in terms of him saying it as a way of being like, we have tied you down. We have been your problem. You go and make something for yourself. But especially reading this the first time, that's such a weird reaction to have to somebody getting, especially taken by fairies who everybody's saying is bad people.
Yeah. It's like, sir, do you know something?
Yeah, it's very suspicious. And I feel like definitely you, when you read this the first time, you were like, oh my God, is he like part fairy or something? Like, you
Yeah.
definitely thought their dad was like part fairy or something.
Well, I also, like, going briefly back to the mercenary, you know, I was thinking one of the theories I had was um, the mercenary was showing off her leg and how, like, scarred it was and black. And I think one of the theories that I brought up to you when we were doing our first book talk was that it reminded me of how when the debtors crushed the father's leg, like, his leg
Ah,
was all messed up and he was told he would never walk again.
mm,
Um, and yet, I mean, he's still kind of not walking, he's hobbling, um,
yeah,
like, so I thought at first, that the debtors were actually fairies that had come to crush his leg. That was one of the theories I had. So I
right, right.
definitely, when I was reading, I'm like, oh yeah, the father must definitely have experience with fairies.
Um, yeah, so it's like I see like the progression. I see kind of like I feel like what the intention was for him saying that, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's super sus, man. Um, I also just want to bring up what, she's kind of housekeeping at the end. She's very, okay, there's 2 weeks worth of venison. Like by the time you'll need to find something else, like I cannot be your source anymore. And I just want to say it's like very practical.
Mhm.
And then, they had this spat earlier about Thomas and Nesta, and Feyre's last words to Nesta about that are just, whoa. Especially like for a first part of the book, like I was stunned. Stunned into like, oh my God, this is great writing.
She's just like,
Um,
whatever you do, don't marry him.
yeah, do not marry Thomas. Apparently his dad beats his mom and nobody does anything to stop it. And she
God,
says
this quote is,
yes, yes, we
God, it's and like, okay, first of all, like the whole like beating and like nothing to no one does anything to stop it. Like that made
Mhm,
like Nessa's eyes widen, but like she was still kind of crouched
mhm.
down and stuff. But then Feyre adds on, bruises are harder to conceal than poverty, and it's like first again, whoa,
Bam.
Sarah, whoa. And then Nessa like stiffens, so it's like, damn, so that actually like hit it too. And it's like,
It's
see, Feyre, like she may be young, but she understands.
it's true. It's true though. Like, would you rather put yourself into a situation where, you think it's love, and then seeing how the parents interact with themselves, it's like I would never want to be with a man who like saw his mom getting beat up and didn't do anything to stop it. Like as a kid,
So.
sure. Like it's kind of hard to step in as a kid even, but as a full-grown adult, like not doing anything, you're an asshole.
And also, like, not only that, but typically that kind of abuse runs in the family. And so,
Yeah.
typically it would then probably lead to Thomas beating up Nesta if that ended up happening.
And obviously she's too strong of a woman to ever like I feel like get into that situation. But sometimes even the strongest of us can get into a relationship because if we think it's love. And so she's shutting it down like immediately.
Also,
You
though, I
know.
totally feel like, though, if they did do that, Nesta would totally kill Thomas.
Oh yeah, like like I'm surprised like we didn't get like a scene where she's just like grumbling and she's like going with a knife. I'm thinking she's gonna like kill him right on the spot. Um, but yeah, I do want to say that about Feyre, it's almost like she wanted to say that earlier at dinner, but
But couldn't find the words.
yeah, and now it's like, well, fuck it. I might not know if I see you ever again, so just gonna tell you the facts. Here it is. Don't do it.
Don't do
Um,
it. Don't
it's
do
that
it.
it's almost like what her mom did to her. My one last wish. Do not do that.
God.
And I think what's sad because obviously the beast takes her away like now. Like there's not really a getting ready. Just take the stuff that she has on her and go out, which isn't much. Um, and he takes her away and her sisters say nothing. Like none of them say goodbye. I mean, I guess I know like the son situation, but I was like, oh my God, what assholes? Like, why aren't they saying anything to her?
No, they're
You
just,
know,
I mean, part of them, like, part of me wants to excuse their behavior as, like, they're just, like, scared because, a fairy came in and stole their sister
hmm
away. Um, but, like, fear can go a while, but, like, in this situation, fear seems to be overruling their, uh, unspoken care for Feyre. But
true.
like they seem to let that fear have control, which is not super great considering, she may not return.
Yeah, and like I get the I feel like reading it over again, I get the situation, but at the same time, as somebody reading for this for the first time and reading it when I did, I was like thinking to myself, that's a terrible relationship. I feel like I would be fighting. If it's someone I really, really cared about, I feel like I'd be fighting tooth and nail no matter what it was to. And maybe that just shows me as a person versus other people. But yeah, um, I just wanted to highlight on that.
And
Um,
just real quick, I want to mention, I just considered this, but like briefly going back through the book, um, literally Nesta's last words to Feyre, at least that we have read as readers, was
right.
before she went off to Isaac Hale of like, I do hope you two are taking precautions. So it's like, technically Nesta's last words to her were warning and potential care, but also was totally like, I don't trust you to be taking care of yourself.
I also feel like that was supposed to be a jab. Like, I
It
do hope you
definitely
guys
was
are
a little
taking
bit.
protection. Like,
Yeah.
that bitchy tone.
Like assuming that
Um,
Feyre would do something like so irresponsible.
I feel like it's one of those things where I think she realized, like, again, reading it over, I think like she realized the words she said. Like
Hmm.
it's almost like when like somebody, if not gonna get morbid here, but if it's somebody who you like dies and you like had like, in those movies where somebody dies and like their last words were them like were terrible. And they're like, well, I can't take those words back. And so she doesn't know what to say to her because the last words that were to her were kind of pointed.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to immediately be like, "Hey, I love you. Be safe out there." It's like, no,
I
that doesn't work.
I think she also doesn't want to draw attention to herself because if she draws attention to herself, then it draws attention to Elaine, and so they don't want that.
Hmm.
If anything, that's like something to take away from their sisterly bond is that the only thing Nesta and Feyre seem to like bond over is Elaine in terms of feeling like they want to protect her and, keep her in the dark because Elaine is kind of the light in the garden. She's the flower. She's the person that they want to protect the innocence. And so that's the
Yeah.
one thing that they bond over. And so yeah, um, we get the next scene then, that whole big scene. And we get next up that Feyre's just following the beast. Chapter 5 starts out following him into the woods. The one thing the mercenary told her not to do again. But
She
now she
didn't
can't
really have a
really.
choice. Yeah.
If anything, she's protected. He looks like he can beat up a few baddies. Like,
She's
um,
safe technically because she's following the rules of the treaty.
Mm. I feel like this whole first part of this scene of monologue, she was like how I said before, she was, purely running on adrenaline. I'm gonna stand up to this beast, stand up for my family, and now she's like thinking in her mind, oh crap, oh crap, wait, this is actually happening.
And like the whole like fairy. Oh shit, I killed a fairy.
Like, I feel like the realization that's such a, I don't know if this is just us because we both have the same thing, but having the realization after the fact of having it so super late and just being like, wait, I'm going to Prithian. Wait, I left my family behind. Oh my God, wait, did I kill a fairy? Like, having all the realizations afterwards is such a, I don't know, to us is makes so much sense. Um, and so I think what threw me off the most, right? So there's like this big beast, right? And so the beast is prowling to the woods, and then there's just a random horse that's saddled in
Very nicely saddled.
very nicely saddled. And I'm thinking to myself, obviously the first time around, I did not think anything about the horse. I was like, that's like I didn't think anything about it, but I was like, this beast is crawling on four legs. How did it, wait?
That is actually fairly close to like my first thought of like I read about the horse and I'm just like, what, did he bring a snack so that he didn't snack on her?
My oh my God, I do remember you saying that. Oh my God, no. I didn't honestly, I didn't think anything of it. I literally feel like I went through this book in my innocent 2018-year-old mind and was just like, I'm just following along with the story and I don't question anything. Um, but yeah, no, read it the second time and I was like, okay, wait. If he went on all fours, how the heck did he have a whole, you know what? Magic. Magic ex machina. Anything magic related obviously is just gonna like, well, we can solve everything with magic.
Or nothing
Uh,
makes sense because of magic.
yeah, and it makes sense that she doesn't know because leading into it, she kind of tells it in this sort of chapter of monologue. It's a pretty short chapter anyway, but um, very few of the humans know about Prithian. Like, maybe back 500 years ago when they were slaves, they knew about Prithian, but all they know is that there's seven courts. They don't know what the courts' names are, even though we know because if you look at the map, you know what the court names are. Um, because they don't have any maps, like the humans don't have any maps, any knowledge, any books about uh, the Fae in general, and so all that Feyre knows that she's walking into is that there's seven courts with seven High Lords who rule over Prithian, and so each High Lord runs over their own court. So she doesn't know what she's walking into. Um, and honestly, I don't know about you, but I think I told you this when we first read this. I was like, I kind of like, even though it frustrates the hell out of me, I like the fact that we're following along with Feyre's knowledge because I think
Hmm.
because this is written in first POV, we're getting her really real reactions to the things that we learn, the things that we are going to eventually learn as we go down the road.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an interesting style for a fantasy. Because I feel like a lot of the times, like they try to cram so much setup into like a really beginning story, beginning title of the story, and then just it fades as it goes along. Versus this is just okay. We're getting little tidbits.
It definitely feels like we're like almost like a character in the book as well. Like
Yeah.
we're like following along alongside Farah as she figures it out. And this may be weird to say, but at times when I was reading it, because I talk to myself to think things through, I basically was just like, no, you wouldn't do that, right, Farah? So like I was almost like talking to her or something. And so I guess
Mhm.
in that sense, it like is like you're there with Feyre, help figuring it out alongside her and learning as she learns.
Right.
And I think that kind of, like you said, that kind of setup is not very off. Like that's a pretty rare thing. Um,
Mhm.
and it makes it more engaging to read as well because it's not like we're just given everything, like you said. So it's not like,
Mhm.
first of all, it's not crammed all together. And
Yeah.
secondly, it's not that we know it before she does. unless
Mhm.
like we guess it or whatever. But even then, it's not confirmed till she learns it.
Right.
And so it makes you want to stay because it's like, I mean,
Hmm.
even for you, you're impatient, and yet you still manage to read it and stick with it, and now you love it. So like, it definitely
Right.
does some way of like sticking with it.
But I read that stuff like almost like immediately. I read it, you know, full on. I was like, okay, now I got to get to the next thing. Got to get to the
Again,
next thing.
because you wanted to know, that's why you kept reading it,
Hmm.
rather than
And
just getting it all at once and being like, okay, I'm done.
that's what's a book when I can. Again, I will say I'm not like such of a cringy girl reader in the sense of, okay, I'm gonna read like I loved Twilight back in the day, 100%. I reread it maybe twice. Um, this is not that. Like Twilight, I feel like I could read as like a book series and just read it once and be fine. This, I feel like I learn something new each time I read it or have a different perspective each time I read it. And that's what I think is just
Definitely.
so beautiful about it. Um, and so, especially as somebody reading it for the first time, like you're following along with her, but also for the people that have read it before, they're like, oh, you know what? I missed that. And that's why we have like our spoilery section for people who are going to, talk about it. But anyway, um, so again, the comic in the part that I feel like it's hard to be comedic in was Feyre and the Beast's first talk. I also like how we don't get his name. Like, we don't get his name for a while in terms of this. It's very much just the Beast. She even asks him what his name is, and he's like, would you care? Does it matter to you? It's like, no, not. I mean, I'm just trying to make conversation.
Part of me expected her to be like, well, if I'm living on your lands, then probably I should know your name, right?
Yeah, it's so awkward, but at the same time, it's so Feyre to be
Yeah.
questioning, but the Beast to not give her any sort of information. She's like, well, what manner of fairy are you? Silence.
It very
Uh,
much like gives me the feel of like, well, I may have given you mercy after you killed my friend, but you still killed my friend, so I'm gonna ignore you.
it's like, I don't want to talk the rest of this trip. If you can stay silent, I think we'll be fine. And so what ends up happening is Feyre feels this metallic tang up her nose. And so we know that's a sign of, because, I mean, it says in the book, but it's a sign of magic. So I kind of like that it has like a smell. I feel like it had to have something. It couldn't, you just couldn't magic somebody and then there'd be no side effect. But so he basically essentially knocks her out for this 2-day trek, which, interesting enough, one of my friends from high school that's rereading this book, don't want to, bring up too much, but when she was rereading this, I remember she said, well, how did she go to the bathroom? It's been 2 days. And I was thinking to myself, I guess I didn't really care, but at the same time, magic. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
Magic is my answer to
that'd
that
be the only
question.
answer. And also, honestly, that's interesting that you bring that up. I didn't know that she asked that. But like my answer to that probably, of course, magic. But also, unfortunately, I think Feyre, like her whole family, wouldn't. They'd be so poor that they don't have enough to like get good water constantly. So she's probably very dehydrated anyway. So she probably actually doesn't have to go that much, and she definitely wasn't eating as much.
That's actually a better answer than my cop out answer that I gave her. Like,
But of
because
course, magic also helps.
I couldn't really explain that because, well, obviously you have to suspend some manner of disbelief. And
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, I was like, yeah, nope, that's too realistic. Don't ask that question.
Wait, did I just use logic that you didn't? Am I finally
Yeah, you
using
did.
logic and out logicking you?
Oh my God, it's a Christmas miracle, and it's not even Christmas.
No, it's a Prithian miracle.
Oh my God, I feel like now I deserve your puns for getting you into this. Like
Oh,
I deserve.
totally.
Um, but yeah, so literally, and so unfortunately, we have to. This is like the end of our first episode, but the ending of the chapter is literally them walking up to the gates of apparently this beast manor.
Like,
Well, we
why
don't
does a
know.
beast have a manor? That's so strange.
It's like, wait, but no, like, so I just want to highlight what she says. She says, it might be my prison or my salvation. And I really dig, okay, of course, Sarah, always ending her chapter on like a good quote of some sort. Um, I like it because I think that me reading it a second time, I'm like, oh, that's kind of like what her father was saying, maybe I'm going to take this circumstance that I'm given and twinned it? I just made up a word. Twist it or like take it into my advantage. And I feel like that's also a life lesson is maybe taking a situation that, and I do this all the time, where I'll maybe take a negative that's happening and somehow swing it into a positive.
And also, something that I literally just thought of, like reading that quote again, is, my prison or my salvation, I couldn't decide which. And now I'm thinking, well, actually, with that kind of like comparison, I don't really think it is up to her to decide. Like, there are aspects that are up to her to decide, like whether she continues fighting and asking questions or if she just accepts her fate. So that kind of thing she can decide, but I think, like, definitely, like, something's gonna, like, happen, like, that it's just meant to happen. Like,
Right.
I think kind of what her father was saying, like, she was too good to be there, so she was meant to get out of that cottage anyway, and how it goes
Mm-hmm.
from there is half up to her, but then also, I think, honestly, left up to fate a little bit.
Well, also, yeah, she doesn't know what she's walking into. Like, I was thinking to myself, oh, she's walking into, the treaty keeps them from keeping slaves, but because she broke the treaty, does that mean she's going to become a slave?
That, or
Is it
like
like,
legit, like the Beauty and the Beast kind of thing of like being locked in a room.
ah, yeah, that too. So it's, yeah, like it leaves with a lot of questions but it's also like so interesting to keep reading on. So we're excited to, go on this journey because what an epic opening to a book series. Just in general, to me, I feel like some people might not. I don't want to say understand it. I mean, I hope by the end, like you liked it, but oh my god, to me, what an epic opening to a fantasy novel. Um, and so I just want to thank everybody. On behalf of Liesl and me, thank everybody for listening to our podcast. So we'll have our email down into their Twin Flames Between Worlds podcast email down in the description below, and we'll also have like a comment section on Riverside and Spotify. So go ahead and follow. And if you have any questions for us, about us, or if you're interested, probably not. If you have questions for us, or if there's something that you want us to go more in depth about, or just even a Q&A about characters or so forth, go ahead and do that down below. Do you have anything else, Liesl?
Definitely questions or like feedback or whatever, because I am a people pleaser. So combine people pleasing with something that I'm passionate about, and
Right.
hopefully that turns out all right. But yeah, I mean, literally, I just have songs in my head of just like, tell everybody I'm on my way.
Oh my God. We would love questions and, if you enjoy the book or even just comments in general, we like totally respond to those.
Or
So
ideas or whatever. We're open to everything.
yeah,
This is just
because we,
for a fun time. It's for our fun, but hopefully it's also for your enjoyment.
right. So we hope you had a fun time. We'll see you in the the spoiler section of this first couple of chapters
Or
in the
if this
next,
is your first time reading, then we'll see you in the next episode.
yes, in the non-spoilery version.
The real episode, too, I guess.
Right. So see you in those next episodes.
Bye bye.